They were running. 200,000 soldiers of the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, were running for their lives across a plateau of dust and stone in southern Syria. The largest army the empire had assembled in a century, veterans of Persia, garrison troops from Armenia, heavy cavalry from Anatolia, Christian Arab federates from the deserts, men who had marched under the imperial eagle from the Nile to the Taurus Mountains. They were not retreating in order. They were not executing a tactical withdrawal. They were fleeing. Behind them, the late August sun burned through a haze of dust and blood. In front of them lay a ravine carved by centuries of water and wind, a sudden, brutal tear in the earth called Wadi al-Walid. Nearly 200 feet down, jagged rocks waited like teeth. The first soldiers reached the edge and tried to stop. They never had a chance. The men behind them, terrified, unable to see, unable to hear commands in the chaos, kept pushing. Shields rammed into backs. Horses crashed into infantry. Someone screamed that the flanks had collapsed. Someone shouted that the enemy cavalry was in the rear. And then the first line went over. One man, then 10, then hundreds, then thousands. On August 20th, 636 AD, at the Battle of Yarmouk, an empire fell, not only to swords and spears, but to panic, miscalculation, and a cliff. 70,000 Romans died in that ravine. Many never struck a blow in their final moments. They were crushed beneath their own comrades, broken on stone, buried in armor beneath a mountain of bodies. And the man who drove them there had been preparing for 6 days. His name was Khalid ibn al-Walid. They called him Saif Allah, the sword of God. And at Yarmouk, he did not merely win a battle. He ended 700 years of Roman dominion in the Levant. The world before Yarmouk. To understand Yarmouk, you must understand the world it shattered. In 636 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we call the Byzantine Empire, was one of the greatest powers on earth. It was the direct heir of Rome. Constantinople glittered with gold-domed churches and colossal walls. Its emperors commanded fleets across the Mediterranean. Its laws shaped civilization. Its armies had just survived a catastrophic, generation-long war with the Sasanian-Persian Empire, a conflict that had nearly destroyed both superpowers. That war had ended only a few years earlier, in 628. Emperor Heraclius had done the impossible. He marched deep into Persian territory, defeated the Persians in a stunning counteroffensive, and restored Roman prestige. It was considered one of the greatest military comebacks in history. But victory came at a cost. The empire was exhausted, its treasury drained, its armies battered, its frontier defenses weakened. And from the south, from the Arabian Peninsula, long dismissed as peripheral and politically fragmented, came a force no Roman strategist had fully accounted for. A newly unified Arab-Muslim army. Under the banner of Islam, tribes that had once fought each other now marched together. Within a few years of the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632, these armies had surged beyond Arabia's borders. They shattered Persian forces at al-Qadisiyah. They took Damascus. They moved with speed, cohesion, and an ideological fire that alarmed every power in the region. And at the center of these campaigns was a commander with a rare, terrifying gift for war. Khalid ibn al-Walid, a former opponent of Islam who had once fought against the Muslims at Uhud. Khalid later converted and became one of the most formidable military leaders of his age. He mastered maneuver warfare, rapid cavalry strikes, and psychological pressure. He did not rely on numbers. He relied on mobility, discipline, and timing. By 636, he had already helped dismantle the Sasanian grip on Iraq. Now he was in Syria. And Rome was watching. We send everything. When news reached Constantinople that Damascus had fallen and Roman forces in Syria were faltering, Emperor Heraclius understood the stakes instantly. If Syria fell, Palestine would follow, then Egypt, then the breadbasket of the empire, the wealth of the eastern Mediterranean, the holy cities of Jerusalem and Antioch. This was not a border raid. This was existential. Heraclius convened his generals. The solution was simple in theory: overwhelm the invaders with sheer mass, crush them with numbers so vast that resistance became meaningless. So he gathered everything. Estimates vary in modern scholarship. Ancient sources often exaggerate, but the Byzantine army assembled for Yarmouk was enormous by any standard, likely between 80,000 and 150,000 men, perhaps more in traditional accounts. It was the largest field army the empire had mobilized in decades. They came from across the empire: Greek infantry, Armenian contingents, Slavic auxiliaries, Ghassanid Arab allies, heavy cavalry in lamellar armor, archers, lancers, veterans hardened by the Persian wars. Opposing them stood roughly 30,000 to 40,000 Muslim troops, outnumbered at least 2 to 1, perhaps 3 to 1. On paper, it was not a contest. The Byzantines marched south and encamped near the Yarmouk River, on a plateau bordered by deep ravines. The ground was wide and open, ideal for cavalry maneuvers. But there was one detail. Behind the Roman position lay Wadi al-Walid, a ravine so steep and deep that retreat across it, in disorder, would be catastrophic. The Byzantines camped with their backs to it. Why would they retreat? They had the largest army in the region. They were Rome. Khalid saw the cliff, and he said nothing. 6 days of pressure. The battle began around August 15th, 636. Day 1, the Byzantines attacked. Wave after wave of infantry advanced, supported by cavalry. The ground shook beneath tens of thousands of marching feet. Dust rose in choking clouds. Roman commanders sought to use their numerical superiority to stretch and break the Muslim line. Khalid's army absorbed the blow. They bent. They suffered heavy casualties. Units were forced back toward their camps. At times, the situation was critical. Sources recount moments when Muslim women in the rear reportedly rallied fleeing soldiers and drove them back into the fight. But the line did not collapse. Day 2, more assaults. Day 3, renewed pressure. Day 4, coordinated pushes against the flanks. Day 5, increasing Roman frustration. Why weren't they breaking? The Byzantines expected a quick decision. Instead, they faced disciplined resistance and counterattacks from Khalid's mobile cavalry reserve, a force he had carefully centralized under his direct control, rather than dispersing among infantry units as was common practice. This cavalry reserve was Khalid's secret weapon. Over 5 days, he rotated units, reinforced weak points, and studied Roman patterns. He observed how their commanders coordinated movements. He noted the communication gaps between different ethnic contingents. He recognized that such a massive army was difficult to control, especially under stress. Most importantly, he saw something else. The Romans were growing tired. Large armies consume enormous resources. Coordination across languages and commands breeds friction. The longer the battle dragged on, the more strain appeared in the Byzantine structure. Khalid did not need to win on day 1. He needed the right moment. The morning of day 6. On August 20th, the Romans decided to end it. Their commander, often identified in sources as Vahan, an Armenian general, ordered a full-scale assault. No holding back, no reserves, commit everything. Smash the Muslim army in a single, overwhelming push. At dawn, the Byzantine host advanced in its largest coordinated attack of the campaign. It worked at first. The Muslim center bent dangerously. Units gave ground. Dust and confusion spread. To many Roman soldiers, it looked like victory. They pressed harder. and in doing so, they made a fatal mistake. They committed all their reserves forward. Khalid had been waiting for exactly that. When he saw that the Byzantine flanks were exposed and their rear unsupported, he gave the signal. His mobile cavalry reserve, thousands of mounted warriors held back for days, swept out from concealment and struck. One detachment slammed into the Roman left. Another crashed into the right. Fast, concentrated, precise. Unlike the Byzantine army, which had to maneuver vast, cumbersome formations, Khalid's cavalry operated as a single flexible fist. They exploited gaps instantly. The Roman flanks began to buckle. Orders conflicted. Units tried to pivot under pressure, but you cannot easily turn tens of thousands of men in tight formation while under attack. Rear units, seeing chaos ahead, began to fall back. Frontline troops were still pushing forward. The army folded in on itself. And then someone shouted the word that seals armies' fates. Retreat. The cliff. Panic in a small army is dangerous. Panic in a massive army is catastrophic. Tens of thousands of men turned simultaneously. Horses wheeled. Shields dropped. Commands were lost in the roar. Behind them was Wadi al-Walid. The first ranks reached the edge and realized the horror. There was nowhere to go. But the men behind them did not see the cliff. They saw bodies stopping, blocking the path of escape. They pushed. And the front line went over. Accounts describe soldiers tumbling in armor, entangled together. Some tried to climb down. Some attempted to cling to rocks. Many were crushed by those falling above them. Meanwhile, Khalid's cavalry pressed the rear, driving the rout. Byzantine resistance disintegrated into survival instinct. For hours, the slaughter continued. By sunset, the great Roman army of Syria had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Modern historians debate the exact numbers, but the losses were devastating, tens of thousands dead, captured, or scattered. The strategic result is undisputed. Byzantine Syria was lost. Farewell, Syria. When word reached Emperor Heraclius, he reportedly uttered words that echoed through history. Farewell, Syria. What a beautiful land this is for the enemy. Whether the exact phrasing is apocryphal or not, the sentiment was real. After Yarmouk, the Byzantine Empire never regained control of Syria. Within years, Jerusalem fell. Then Egypt. The Levant, Roman for 7 centuries, became part of the expanding Islamic world. Yarmouk was not just a battlefield victory. It was a civilizational turning point. It shifted the balance of power in the Near East permanently. It ended Greco-Roman dominance in the region and opened the door to the Islamic Golden Age that would transform science, trade, philosophy, and geopolitics for centuries. And it was achieved not through numerical superiority, but through maneuver, discipline, timing, and understanding terrain. The man behind the victory. Khalid ibn al-Walid never lost a battle in his career, according to traditional accounts. From the Ridda Wars in Arabia to the campaigns in Iraq and Syria, he demonstrated adaptability across deserts, rivers, and fortified cities. He understood mobility in an age when many armies relied on rigid formations. He centralized cavalry when others dispersed it. He read terrain like a weapon. At Yarmouk, he did not defeat Rome with brute force. He shaped the battlefield psychologically. For 6 days, he applied pressure. He absorbed punishment. He lured the enemy into committing fully. He turned their greatest strength, their numbers, into their greatest weakness. And when the moment came, he struck. Not randomly. Decisively. The lesson of Yarmouk. History often remembers empires as permanent. Rome had stood in the East for 700 years. It had survived Goths, Persians, rebellions, plagues. It seemed immovable. But at Yarmouk, permanence proved fragile. One campaign. 6 days. One commander who saw a cliff and understood what panic would do to a massive army trapped against it. The Battle of Yarmouk reminds us that in warfare, intelligence outweighs mass, cohesion defeats size, leadership matters more than numbers. The largest army in a century fell not simply because it was outmaneuvered, but because it was outthought. And as the dust settled over Wadi al-Raqad, and the ravine filled with silence where tens of thousands had fallen, a new era began in the Middle East. The empire did not die that day in Constantinople, but in Syria. Rome fell off a cliff,